All right, good evening. Glad you all could be here tonight. My name is Dennis Lavrone. I'm an adjunct faculty here at Del Valle, and I'm in the Environmental Science and Policy Studies departments. So welcome to our first One Health Speakers Seminar tonight here. We have 5 more after this for the semester. And if you're students, you are well aware of those dates and speakers. So we hope to see most of you all here again. I'd also like to thank the public for coming out. We had really good coverage of this event in the Bucks County Herald, so we're appreciative of that. This event was also co-sponsored by the Bucks County Audubon Society, so we thank them for their help on this. If you're a student, we have 3 different sign-in sheets down here. If you haven't already done it, be sure you do that before you leave tonight for your extra credit or whatever your professor's doing on that. And then on this clipboard over here, this is for the non-student participants tonight, as far as giving us your email address, and we can keep you posted on upcoming events. So if you're from the public, be sure to sign up for that. I want to acknowledge Professor Reg Hoyt, who all the students know, of course, and he's right over here in the yellow shirt. He is the coordinator of this whole One Health thing at Del Valle. We've been doing this for a couple years now, I guess, going on 3 years as far as getting this thing together, yeah. And so I'm one of the professors on the committee that helps to plan this every semester. So, but Reg is the spark plug for keeping this going. For those of you that don't already know what One Health is, let me just read our stated mission here. One Health is a multidisciplinary approach that works locally, regionally, nationally, and globally to attain optimal well-being for people in society, the environment, and plants and animals. It's a triad, as it says on the screen there. Together, these 3 major components make up this One Health triad, and the well-being of each is inextricably connected to the others. So that, so our speaker tonight fits right into that approach to what we're trying to do here with One Health at Del Valle. And One Health isn't only here at Del Valle; it's at a lot of major universities around the country. Different universities have different types of programs, and we're building our own here at Del Valle. But our guest speaker tonight is going to talk about the Green Amendment, securing our right to a healthy environment. And last spring, I saw Maya Van Rossum, our guest tonight, give this same type of presentation. I don't know if it'll be exactly the same, but probably pretty close, at Temple University. And when I saw that, I said, we need to get her here for One Health. Maya is the river keeper, and if you don't know what the river keeper, the Delaware river keeper is, you'll find out tonight from Maya, and you can find out more on their website. So without further ado, let me introduce Maya Van Rossum. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn that button off. I turn this button on. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I turn. Great. And put this in my pocket to walk around. Yeah, because I flail my arms. I'll try not to throw a pen at anybody. So I really appreciate One Health having me, and appreciate the Audubon and the role they played in bringing me back here to talk about this very important topic, green amendments. But before I get started with my talk, I always forget the little things I want to mention in terms of paper. So I'm going to do that first, and then we'll get on to the talk, which hopefully is the fun stuff. So if you didn't get on your way in, and if you're interested, we have a little note sheet and a pen, in case you forgot a pen, in case you wanted to take some notes, but it also has some helpful resources that are associated with the talk in case that's of interest. But also, probably of more interest, is we always at my talks have a free drawing for a copy of the book. And so out front, Bridget had these little cards, and if you wanted to fill it out, there'll be a drawing at the end of the evening. So if you want a chance for a copy of the book, you can do that. You just have to sign up. And they're at the table right outside. I don't think Bridget's in here. So my goal tonight is hopefully to inspire you to think about environmental protection in a different way and to recognize we need a new path for protecting the environment here in the United States of America. And also to be aware that you as a member of the Pennsylvania community, are you all from Pennsylvania? Anybody from a different state? Where are you from? Oh, good. New Jersey? Anybody that's not New Jersey or Pennsylvania? Virginia, okay, interesting. All right, so we'll be able to bring all those things in. So if you are here from Pennsylvania, part of my goal is to help you realize that you have a heightened opportunity and also a heightened responsibility when it comes to protecting the environment on this new path that I'm going to talk about. If you're from New Jersey, you are going to learn that you have an opportunity to forge this path in the state of New Jersey. And if you're from Virginia, well, Virginia's not there yet, but you could be the leader in Virginia to make it happen, right? So I'm going to count on you. I'm going to take your picture. I'm going to remember that you're the go-to guy. So I am the Delaware Riverkeeper. The Delaware Riverkeeper is a person, and I happen to be the person honored with the title of being the Delaware Riverkeeper. And so my job is to be the voice of the river and to make sure that anytime anybody, anywhere, wants to have an impact on the Delaware River or any aspect of its watershed, that the needs of the river are not just understood, but are given the highest level of protection possible in that decision-making process. But you and I both know that protecting a natural resource as large as the Delaware River, really any natural resource, that's not the job of one person, right? That's the job of a community. And so we have a wonderful community that is the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. I have 20 staff members, I have board members, and I have member members throughout the entire Delaware River watershed that help me very literally fight the good fight for the river. And just for those who aren't familiar with the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we genuinely work throughout the entire Delaware River watershed, each of the watershed states, New York, New Jersey, PA, and Delaware, and also work at the national level. But that's really all I'm going to say about the Delaware Riverkeeper Network per se and the wealth of work we do. I'm really here focused on one outgrowth of the work of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. And as I said, I'm hoping to inspire you to think about environmental protection a little bit differently than perhaps you have, well, a lot differently than perhaps you have to date. So you are probably all aware that here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, across the United States of America, we literally have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of environmental protection laws that are in place at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level. And they're designed to address a whole host of issues. And as each of these laws have been put forth and advanced, they have accomplished good in terms of community protection and environmental protection. They've reduced pollution and environmental degradation. They've prevented illness. They very literally saved lives. They've created jobs. They've supported healthy economies. They've protected communities from droughts and from floods and from wildfires. So there is good that has come out of the environmental protection legal system that has been advanced here in the United States of America. But despite that fact, despite that we have this good, fundamentally, big picture, the system of environmental protection laws that we have here in the United States of America have failed us. Because these laws are focused not so much on preventing pollution and preventing degradation, they're really focused on managing pollution and managing degradation, managing the who, the when, the where, the how, but not really the if. And we can see that by just looking at stories of communities across the nation. This is the community of Paulsboro. The community of Paulsboro, like so many communities across the U.S., find that their drinking water is contaminated with a man-made toxic chemical, known as a perfluorinated chemical. There are a variety of them. There's PFOA, PFNA, PFOS, and certainly in Bucks County, you've probably been reading a lot about this in the local news. Well, Gloucester County is where we, and the community of Paulsboro is where the Delaware Riverkeeper Network many years ago sort of first started to out the very dangerous condition here in the Delaware River watershed, long before we knew about it in Bucks County. Perfluorinated chemicals have very serious health consequences for those who have the misfortune of coming into contact with it, especially finding it in their drinking water. They cause adverse health impacts of all kinds, including a variety of cancers. Perfluorinated chemicals, PFCs, contaminate drinking water supplies in over 27 states. And that contamination is the result not just of industry, but is the result of government activity and action. Again, as those of you who are following the news here in Bucks County well know. We have families like the Stauffer family who live in a lovely community called General Warren Village. But right next to their community is this site. This is the Bishop Tube site. For many, many years, little metal tubes were manufactured at this site. As a result of the manufacturing operations at the Bishop Tube site, this site has become super saturated with dangerous toxins. Amongst other things, something known as TCE, trichloroethylene. TCE, like PFCs, is a toxin, and it is very dangerous with very serious health consequences for those who have the misfortune of coming into contact with it. It causes illnesses of all kinds, including a variety of cancers. Now the thing is not only is this site super saturated with dangerous toxins, and not only did this dangerous condition happen despite the fact that we have all of these environmental protection laws in place that are supposed to protect us, as happened in the case of the PFCs, but the government has known about the very dangerous conditions at this site since at least the mid-1980s. And despite all of these environmental protection laws we have in place, they've done nothing to clean it up. And as a result, the pollution plume has spread more than a mile away through the groundwater, through a stream that runs off of the site, bringing the TCE contamination to new environments and to new communities. Despite all of the environmental protection laws we have in place, we have communities like the community of Minnesink that found themselves faced with a proposal to construct a fracked gas compressor station right in the heart of their rural community. Now, the people of Minnesink didn't want this fracked gas compressor station in the heart of their community for a whole boatload of reasons, not the least of which it is known that compressor stations of this kind are a serious source of hazardous air pollutants that result in a whole slew of harmful conditions for people's health if people have the misfortune of finding themselves living next to a compressor station of this kind. Despite all of the environmental protection laws we have in place, and despite the years of organizing and advocacy of the people of Minnesink, including pursuing some very significant litigation, today, the arrow is a little off, it should be a little higher up. Today, that compressor station is right in the heart of the Minnesink community. In fact, the homes are all the way around it. And if you go to Minnesink and you speak with the people of Minnesink, they will tell you how they are suffering as a result of this fracked gas compressor station, how their health is being impacted, how they've lost the value of their property, how their quality of life has been devastated, and how nobody will buy their homes, so they can't even sell their homes and get the heck out of there. If you go to Oklahoma, right, the people of Oklahoma are battling against the importation of toxic frack wastewater. This toxic frack wastewater is not being brought into Oklahoma from distant locations like Ohio and Pennsylvania in spite of the environmental protection laws we have in place, but it's actually being brought there because of the environmental protection laws we have in place. The toxic frac wastewater is being brought to Oklahoma communities in order to be injected into the ground as a means of waste disposal. Because the wastewater is so toxic, even the industry doesn't really know what to do with it, so they're trying to lock it away underground. Now, the people of Oklahoma don't want this toxic frac wastewater brought into their community for a boatload of reasons, not the least of which is because they now suffer hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of earthquakes every year as a direct result of this means of disposal in their communities. In fact, in some years, Oklahoma is the earthquake capital of the U.S., state that never really had any earthquakes, not earthquakes that they would feel on the surface of the earth. They now suffer significantly. Minority communities and low-income communities, despite all of these environmental protection laws we have in place, right, that are supposed to be protecting all of us, they continue to be targeted at much higher rates for polluting industrial operations and other activities, and as a result, people of color have a much higher rate of exposure to contamination of all kinds in the air, in the water, in the soil, next to their schools, next to their homes, right in the heart of their communities. And in fact, oh, I must have cut out a slide. In fact, black and brown babies don't have to wait to be born to have a higher rate of exposure to dangerous toxins. They have a higher rate of exposure while they're forming in their mother's womb. It happens that early. It's that unfair. But it's not just the people who are being impacted. It's not just our communities at large that are being impacted, but plants and animals are also being impacted very significantly, despite the fact that we have all of these environmental protection laws in place. This is one of the few Atlantic sturgeon that's born in the Delaware River right now. The Delaware River actually has a genetically unique population of Atlantic sturgeon. It's a population of Atlantic sturgeon that exists nowhere else on Earth. Nowhere else on Earth but in our beautiful Delaware River. As a result of human activities, we have less than 300 spawning adults left in the Delaware River. Despite all of the environmental protection laws that are supposed to be in place to protect species of all kinds, week in and week out, I continue to have to battle against projects and proposals that very literally put this species on the death block. All of these stories and so many more have happened despite the fact that we have these thousands upon thousands upon thousands of environmental protection laws in place. And when I go into communities to work with them on trying to protect themselves from these proposals, people always ask the same question. Sometimes they ask it with their words, sometimes they ask it with their body language, but inevitably, at some point, the same question emerges. Why? Why? Why are we facing this highly polluting industrial operation, this devastation, this major threat to our health, to our lives? Why? Don't we as people on this earth have a right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment? Don't you have the expectation that when you get a glass of water out of your faucet, it's going to be free from dangerous toxins that might kill you? Yes? No? Right? You do, because you and I both know, right, that we should have a right to these things. But the fact of the matter is, here in the United States of America, for the most part, the answer to the question of why don't we have these rights, or why don't we have these rights, is no, we don't. We have the right to free speech, we have the right to freedom of religion, we have private property rights, we have due process rights. In the state of New York, you've got the right to gamble. In some states, you've got the right to get divorced. But you do not, for the most part, across the United States of America, you do not have a constitutional right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Except with limited exception. And one of those limited exceptions is here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution, you have a constitutional right to all of those other fundamental freedoms we hold dear, that you've learned about your entire lives from elementary school all the way up. And you have a constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And so then the next question people ask is, well, how is that possible? How is it possible that the people of Pennsylvania have a constitutional right to a healthy environment when other communities in other states across the nation do not? I mean, if you look at the history of Pennsylvania when it comes to devastating the environment is just as rich as the history in every other state. There's been just as much resource exploitation here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Just as much pollution was allowed to be spewed into the air and into the water. Just as many industrial operations were allowed to motor in and overwhelm Pennsylvania communities. So how did Pennsylvania, with that same history as every other state, get this wonderful constitutional right? Well, Pennsylvania had something, actually someone, that other states across the nation did not. Pennsylvania had this gentleman. His name is Franklin Curry. And Franklin Curry got himself elected to the Pennsylvania legislature. And Franklin Curry realized that one of the reasons why Pennsylvania's environment was allowed to become so degraded was because it was not being protected at the highest level under the law as those other fundamental freedoms we hold dear, like the right to free speech and freedom of religion. And so Franklin Curry proposed to change that. And he proposed the addition of an amendment to the Pennsylvania Constitution. An amendment that would recognize and protect as an inalienable right the right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And when Franklin Curry's proposal went before the Pennsylvania legislature in 1971, when it went before the House, it passed unanimously. And when it went before the Senate, it passed unanimously. And when it went before the people of Pennsylvania, it passed overwhelmingly by a vote of 4-1. And so in 1971, the people of Pennsylvania got a constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Now, you would have thought, with this wonderful addition to the Pennsylvania Constitution, that the future of environmental protection from 1971 on would have been dramatically different in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania than in any other state across the nation. But that wasn't to be the story for Pennsylvania. And that wasn't the story for Pennsylvania because very early on, there was a tremendous overreach in how people tried to use this newly minted constitutional right. And long story short, a shorter version of the long story, not a long version of the long story, is actually in the book. But you don't need to hear that for purposes of this talk. Long story short, as a result of that overreach, almost as soon as that constitutional provision was added to the Pennsylvania Constitution, it was undermined by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. It was declared to be just good public policy, right? As the Pennsylvania Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time characterized it, it was disemboweled. It was emasculated. Again, good public policy, but robbed of the legal strength that all the other provisions in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution had. And so that was the situation for 42 years. For 42 years, there was this great language on the books in the Constitution, but in reality, there wasn't really any change when it came to environmental rights or environmental protection here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that was the situation until December of 2013. But That all changed in 2013. And actually that change began a few years earlier, about a decade earlier, as a result of the entrance of the fracking industry into Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania communities. In about the mid-2000s, right, drilling and fracking for gas from shale came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it brought with it all of its highly polluting industrial operations. It brought with it tremendous land transformation and deforestation of our natural landscapes. It brought with it the creation of massive volumes of highly toxic frack wastewater, so toxic that even the industry didn't know what to do with it except ship it off to places like Oklahoma, where they could inject it into the ground as a means of getting rid of it and creating earthquakes at the same time. It brought with it water pollution, streams and rivers and wetlands and people's drinking water. It brought with it air pollution, including hazardous air pollutants and the release of methane, a dangerous climate-changing gas. And it brought with it the proliferation of infrastructure, pipelines, and compressor stations, and LNG, liquefied natural gas export facilities. And despite all of the environmental protection laws in place at the state level and at the federal level, it was pretty easy for the industry to overwhelm Pennsylvania communities and just very literally surround homes with all of their highly polluting, devastating industrial operations, damaging people's health and the quality of their lives, ruining the market value of their property. So even if they wanted to, and so many do want to, they can't sell their property to anybody because nobody will buy it, so they can't get away. Right? Just like the people in Menacing. But the thing is, for the industry, despite how easy it was, just wasn't easy enough. The industry really wanted it to be easier. So very literally, representatives of the industry went behind closed doors and they wrote for themselves a piece of legislation. A piece of legislation that was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature in 2012, and when it was passed, came to be known as Act 13. Now, Act 13 did many bad things. There's a whole list of them. But I'm just going to give you one example of how bad Act 13 was. Act 13 said to Pennsylvania communities, listen, normally you can use your zoning authority to say when there's going to be an industrial operation that comes into your town, you can limit that industrial operation to one part of your town, right? You put all your highly polluting industrial operations in one part of the town, and then the rest of the town can be preserved for other uses. Act 13 said, no, 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 no. You cannot use that authority when it comes to drilling and fracking. You must, by virtue of Act 13, you must allow drilling and fracking operations to happen in every part of your community. You have to allow it in your environmental and historic preservation areas. You have to allow it in your agricultural areas. In fact, by virtue of Act 13, Pennsylvania communities had to allow drilling and fracking well pads as close as 300 feet from people's homes. Can somebody think of something on a school campus that's a little bit larger than 300 feet to give people a sense of how big 300 feet is? People play on it. Football field. A football field is in fact longer than 300 feet. So could you imagine waking up, getting up in your lovely home, and walking downstairs and opening your front door, and less than a football field away is an operating fracking well pad? Act 13 told municipal officials they had to allow that to happen. So as bad as things were in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania when it came to drilling and fracking for gas, it was about to get a whole lot worse, believe it or not. Now, at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we have been fighting against drilling and fracking operations for a long time. And in fact, it is largely because of the leadership of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network that we do not have any drilling or fracking operations anywhere within the boundaries of the Delaware River watershed to this very day. We are fighting to keep that protection in place. It is right now in peril of being lifted. That's another talk and another story. I hope you'll go on the Delaware Riverkeeper Network website and get active on that issue. But that's aside. But of course, in working with our colleagues across Pennsylvania, we had not been successful in preventing fracking from, cutting so deeply into Pennsylvania communities. But we knew we had to find a way to take on this piece of legislation passed by the Pennsylvania legislature. Well, how do you take on a law that's been passed by a legislature? The highest power in the state, signed by the governor. Well, you have to have a higher power, right? And we believe, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we believe that here in Pennsylvania, we had that higher power. We just needed to use it and breathe legal life into it. So we actually teamed up with 7 towns and a physician to challenge Act 13. And we each brought our own arguments to the battle. The battle that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network brought to the table through our legal counsel was that Act 13 violated the Environmental Rights Amendment, Article 1, Section 27 of Pennsylvania's Constitution, that long-ignored provision. The case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, a very conservative Supreme Court at the time, led by a very conservative Supreme Court justice. And we got, in December of 2013, we got an amazing decision, one we did not expect. We got an amazing decision where the Chief Justice relied very heavily on the Environmental Rights Amendment in the crafting of the plurality opinion that came out that day. Chief Justice Castile said in his opinion that he wrote about Act 13, by any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation, drilling and fracking, will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that were being harmed were resources essential to life, to health, and to liberty, and that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging violated the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And in that moment, on that day, with that decision, not only did we get declared unconstitutional some of the most devastating provisions in Act 13, but we very literally restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Your right. But the thing is, Chief Justice Castile didn't stop with that, as amazing as that is, right? He went on to say some other really important things. Chief Justice Castile made very, very clear in his opinion that the right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment is an inherent, indefeasible, inalienable right that belongs to us by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth. It is not a right that government officials give to us, and it is not a right that any government official can take away from us. It is ours because we are here on this earth. But he made clear that because of the constitutional provision, Article 1, Section 27, those rights were given the highest level of legal recognition and protection under the law you can have here in the United States of America. And there was a clear obligation on every government official that they had to honor and protect those constitutional rights. And they had to honor and protect those rights not just for the people who are here today, but for the generations yet to come. A much higher bar of protection. It was very powerful. You can applaud again. I love you. You're from New Jersey, right? You just wait. You're going to be leading the way in New Jersey. So, since we had that victory, right, we've been going forth now here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to do some more work, right? We've been going forth, doing the work through our advocacy and through more litigation, as have others who have joined us in this effort, to do the work of defining what it actually means to have a right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Because it's not instantly clear. You don't actually know exactly what that means, right? It's going to take time and work to define that. So we're doing that work, and we're defending that right through our actions and our activities. We're making clear that every government official understand that they have this legal obligation to protect those environmental rights. And we're making sure that all the people of Pennsylvania understand that they have this right, right? And that they need to go forth and demand it and claim it as their own. So we're doing that in Pennsylvania. But when we got that victory in December of 2013, to me, and as the months went on and I really thought about it and we were doing this work, what I realized was that there was a message in this victory. There was a message in Chief Justice Castile's opinion that was meant for all of us, not just for the people of Pennsylvania. There was something for everyone here in the United States of America. First, that we all need to embrace the truth. The message is we all need to embrace the truth of what Chief Justice Castile said that day. That our right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment is an inherent, inalienable, indefeasible right that belongs to us. And we need to rise up as firmly and as passionately to demand and defend that right as we rise up to demand and defend all those other constitutional rights we hold dear, like the right to free speech and freedom of religion. Oh, I got ahead of myself. But it's a good picture, right? That's people in New York rising up, right? And demanding and defending. See, that's another good picture. Sorry. But so that's what we all need to do in every state across the nation, right? We need communities to come together and, as I said, rise up to demand and defend their environmental rights. And they need to do this. They need to rise up in what I call a Green Amendment movement. Now, why do we need a movement? Why do we need a Green Amendment movement to go forth and do this work? Well, we need a movement because there are only 2 states in the United States of America that have a constitutional right to a healthy environment: Pennsylvania and Montana. There are a whole boatload of other states that talk about the environment in their constitutions, but they don't rise to the level of being a Green Amendment like Pennsylvania has and Montana has. Right? They talk about fishing, hunting, and trapping rights, or resource management, or navigation, but they don't talk about the right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Some of them use really beautiful language about environmental rights, but then they add the statement, it's good public policy. And so they rob it of its power and effect. Some of them use beautiful language, but then they say, and the way you get these rights is that your legislature is going to pass laws to define and defend these rights. Well, if your legislature passes sucky laws that allows all those other horrible things we talked about to happen, you're no better off, right? And very importantly, these other provisions are not located in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. So they're not recognizing the right to a healthy environment as an inalienable right and giving it that highest level of legal protection that those other fundamental freedoms get. And we all know that in the U.S. Constitution also, there is no constitutional right to a healthy environment. And so the question becomes, right, the question becomes for the nation as a whole, are we in a moment in time here in the United States of America when communities and states across the nation are willing and wanting to rise up and seek and secure their own constitutional amendment? And I think if you look at the news headlines, I think if you look at what's happening in states across the nation, you will see that people's lives are being devastated because of pollution and environmental degradation. So I believe that they are in that moment where they realize that they need something more. And that's where the role of the people of Pennsylvania come in. First off, we still need something more. So here in Pennsylvania, we still need to go forth of doing the work of demanding our constitutional rights. But we also need to do the work of proving to other states that there's value in having this kind of constitutional provision. That's our duty, that's our obligation, to share with them our experience and our inspiration. And in fact, Pennsylvania is already serving as an inspiration, right? We haven't succeeded totally in getting full vindication of our environmental rights, but people are sitting up and paying attention. And we've actually got a constitutional provision that's been proposed in the state of New York. We have one that's been proposed in the state of New Jersey. And we have one that's been proposed in the state of Maryland. So in those states, right, we need communities to rally behind and pass those constitutional amendments. Now, what does it mean? What does it mean, right, if we don't know instantly, right, what can stay and what can go in terms of pollution and degradation? What really changes? If we can't kick out the frackers instantly, right, and we can't get rid of the PFCs in our drinking water and stop its use and all of those other hard things, then what really changes? Well, a lot changes. First off, our right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment does get that highest legal protection under the law that we can advocate for and we can seek and secure through litigation when necessary. It does protect those rights on par with those other fundamental freedoms we hold dear, right? So it is that higher level of protection. Wherever there is a Green Amendment, including here in Pennsylvania, once people become aware of it, when they're embroiled and battled in these environmental battles, right, they quickly realize that they no longer have to go into public meetings or into their neighborhoods or through their lives hoping that somebody will do the right thing and protect their environment, hoping that when they go to a public meeting and the municipal official is trying to decide whether to tear down another forest for a shopping center that's not needed, we no longer have to hope that they're going to think about environmental protection as they engage in their decision making. We now go into that meeting expecting them to do the right thing, expecting them to protect the environment. We hold them to a higher standard. And if they fail us, we elect them out of office and put somebody in office that will fulfill their constitutional duty. We speak about it differently. We think about it differently. We hold people to account differently. Right now, if you're an environmental advocate, whether you do it all the time like me or just once in a while because something just suddenly came into your town, when you go into a public meeting, it can be pretty daunting to get up there and testify and speak your minds. And whether you're doing it in the public square or you're doing it in a private conversation, people who advocate for the environment often get called names. They get called tree hugger or fish lover. And those are the nice names, right? We get called eco-terrorists. More recently, we get called jihadists. In my case, you get called a bitch. But if you have, I'll take that too. And that's the nice word too. But the thing is, if you have a constitutional provision in your state and you're going forth and advocating for your constitutional right to a healthy environment, there's only one thing that people can call you. There's only one way that people can think about you. You now instantly become a patriot. You are a U.S. patriot because you are fighting for a constitutional right. And here in the United States of America, whether people agree with you or disagree with you, if you are talking about a constitutional right, people perceive you differently. They think about you differently. They talk to you and talk about you differently. So it's very empowering as well for people who are standing up for what's right. Every government official has a clear obligation to protect the environment and environmental rights, and they have to protect it for present and future generations. When government officials are engaged in decision-making, they can't leave the environment to the last after-the-fact thought. They have to think, how can I advance this decision in a way that protects the environment at the same time I allow the energy creation or development project or whatever to go forth? Government has a duty to refrain from decisions and actions that inflict degradation on the environment. And when there has been so much degradation that people have lost their environmental rights, they have a duty to engage in actions and activities, they have a duty to prevent that degradation by others as well in their decision making. When there has been so much degradation that environmental rights have been infringed upon, there is a duty to act to restore those rights. It changes the way decision-making happens. No longer do government officials get to say, well, I checked the box of the statute. I did what the statute allowed me to do, and I did what the regulations allowed me to do. When trying to decide whether or not to pass a law or put in place another highly polluting industrial operation, they have to take an extra step. Does this decision comport with my obligations under the Constitution? It's a new level of review. They have to, in their decision-making, seek first to prevent harm, not just to manage it and permit it. They have to look at existing conditions as they engage in their decision-making and what will be the potential consequences of their decisions. They have to consider cumulative impacts. They have to consider the science. They can't say, gosh, I have no data, so therefore I can go forth and do whatever it is I want. Lack of data is not an excuse for saying yes or advancing a project, right? And they have to do all of these things. They have to do all of these things because if they don't, when there's a legal challenge, they won't be able to defend the decision they made, and that decision will fall. And that's the kind of thing that happened in the Act 13 case and some other cases that have come since then. And if they, after they've done this work, if the government agents, officials determine, yes, there's going to be so much degradation, I might take somebody's drinking water to the extent that I violate the Constitution, that they're going to maybe have some cancer-causing toxin in their drinking water, or some sort of devastating pollution to the air, or something bad's going to happen that rises to the level of violating the constitutional right. Before they can engage in that decision or that activity, they have to then determine that there's a compelling state reason for allowing that to happen. And that even though it's going forth, they've done it in a way, they've advanced the decision to the best of their ability to minimize those impacts. So it doesn't mean there can't be any harm, but there has to be a good reason for inflicting that harm. Now, environmental justice is dramatically strengthened if you have a green amendment in a state, because every single person in the state has the same constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And government, it doesn't matter what their income is, it doesn't matter what the color of their skin is, it doesn't matter where they live, right? And government has a duty to honor and protect those rights of all people and all communities. So they have to treat all individuals and all communities equitably. Not necessarily equally, but equitably, right? Because they have to protect everybody's environmental rights. There can't be any more environmental sacrifice zones, right? You can't just keep foisting everything on the people in Philadelphia or in Camden in order to allow Bucks County to stay pristine. It just can't happen anymore. Because you have to honor the rights of everybody. And very, very importantly, when all else fails, if government undertakes actions and activities that violate your constitutional rights, you have immediate access to the courts. You don't need some other piece of legislation that says you get to go to the court. The Constitution gives you that right, so you can go forth and vindicate your constitutional rights. Right? So the goal is better decisions, but if we don't get better decisions on the front end, then we get to go to court and we get to force better decisions on the back end. We think that this is such an important message to get into the schools, right? Because all of us, right, we all learned about our right to free speech and freedom of religion from when we were children, but we didn't learn about the fact that we didn't have the right to clean water. Because nobody talked about it in school, right? So we need to change that. But I'm going to sort of end where I began. Here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we have a wonderful opportunity to protect our environment better than anywhere else in the nation. Because we don't just have an inherent and indefeasible right to a healthy environment, we have a constitutional right. And so I believe that we in Pennsylvania are on the leading edge of advancing this new path of protection for the environment, this higher path of protection for the environment. And by being on that leading edge, by really fighting for our constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment, not only will we protect ourselves, but we will inspire a green amendment movement that will result in green amendments being passed in state after state after state. And as the synergy builds and as green amendments are being passed in communities across the nation, very naturally everybody will come to realize we can't just have state green amendments, we need a federal green amendment as well. Because the only way we will hold to account an out-of-control president and an out-of-control Congress for their wholesale attacks on our environment is if we have a federal constitutional amendment that we can use to hold them accountable. So I hope that you will join me on the front end, on the leading edge of fighting for this new path of environmental protection, and that you will help be the inspiration that communities across the nation need. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've got time for, if Maya does,
Yes.
time for questions and answer session here. We also have some refreshments out in the lobby there. You can help yourself, too. Does anybody want to start off with a question or comment for Maya? Right down front there, Reg. Reg and I will bring microphones around for you.
And if you didn't sign for the free drawing, you can do it when you go out during refreshments, and then we'll do the drawing out there.
Great, thanks. Oh, we'll try this one. We need you.
You're a star. You're our New Jersey star.
Thank you. No, I've done a lot of acting and stuff, so I just wanted to thank you for coming. I feel really empowered and excited, like, to have someone who's so, like, passionate and, like, about this. 'Cause people need to be angry, you know, like, it's upsetting. And, like, anyway, my question was what your background is and what advice you have for people who are, like, in this field and want to get things done.
Sure. So for me, I'm an attorney, and I'm licensed in multiple states. But I went to law school to learn environmental law. Right? So I chose my law school because they specialized in environmental law. But I did not go to law school in order to litigate on environmental issues. I actually went to law school to be a better advocate for the earth. If you want to do environmental advocacy, I say to people they're trying is pick the path that you love. If it's science, if it's math, if it's art, if it's law, if it's writing, whatever you love, right, in your heart, whatever you enjoy doing, that's the path you should go on. Every single talent can be used to make you a better advocate for the environment. You will never learn in school all the different skill sets you need to know to be the best advocate. Mainly, you need to learn one really good thing that really resonates with you, and then you need to learn how to learn, right? Because you're going to have to be learning your whole life to be a good advocate. So the best thing to do is do the thing that you love and enjoy and that you're good at and that resonates with you, and then bring that to bear on your environmental advocacy. There's a place for everybody in the environmental protection movement. You just have to be committed and impassioned, and don't ever let anybody tell you, oh, you love art? Go study science because you can get it, you'll have a better chance at getting a job. Or you love it, go do that. No, do the thing that you love, and then you will be able to bring that to bear on the battle and be much more effective than if you ever went down a path that didn't resonate with you.
Thank you.
Wow, that's a great first question. Thank you very much. For undergraduates, obviously Maya is an inspiration to all of us, but we also have here at Delaware our master's program in policy studies, so that's an avenue to take as well. Any other questions? Okay.
Hi. Okay, Mount Morris, Pennsylvania, southwest corner, about as far from the Delaware as you can get, has been infiltrated by fracking to the point that the residents cannot drink the public water from their faucets. They all buy drinking water. Do you know about how bad that situation is and what can those people do? It's confusing that the fracking is allowed to continue even though it seems to be against the Constitution of Pennsylvania.
And that really is, and it's an understandable question. It's a question that I get asked in Pennsylvania and out of Pennsylvania. Well, how is it possible that Pennsylvania is like this great leader in a green amendment when you still have fracking going on and so much devastation? The thing is, it's almost as if we only got this constitutional provision in 2013, just a few short years ago, right? So while we've had it for decades, we didn't really have it until 2013. And then the industry was already fully entrenched. So rather than being able to use the Green Amendment to keep them out, we now have to use the Green Amendment to get them out, and that is a lot harder. And there are unfortunately multiple communities that have lost their drinking water or the quality of their, they've lost their health. They're being impacted in so many ways like you described. For each and every one of them, right, it's a different battle. And it is, what I suggest is through the advocacy, and then it may be ultimately through the litigation, is how you bring the Green Amendment to bear towards victory. It doesn't instantly get us there, right? The Green Amendment, because it came so late in the game for us here in Pennsylvania, it's not going to be a panacea for everything, but we need to try to bring it to every battle to strengthen those battles. And not all the time, but I think increasingly we will find that the Green Amendment will be that saving grace for communities that need it. But I think where you're in a situation where the water's already been contaminated, it's about doing the advocacy with the legislator to try to get a legislative leader that will champion your right to clean water. And if you can't do that, it may be talking with an attorney to see about bringing a lawsuit. And that lawsuit may be against the government or it may be against the industry. It's going to depend on the specifics of the case. I know it's not a great answer. And I always wish, and it does really hurt. Like when I go to the Bishop Tube community, they didn't know about this Green Amendment. They're like, what? Like, how is that? And here, the state's been letting this site languish since 1985, knowing about this contamination and this growing plume, and they've not done anything? What? There we're having to litigate, and the Green Amendment is part of our litigation. I know it's not a great answer, but it's a truthful one.
Maya, a while back I heard about a company that was building a plant, I think in Bristol, Pennsylvania, Lower Bucks, that was going to take all of the sludge and all of the hazardous waste from all over the country and bringing it into Pennsylvania for treating. And I think it was close to the Delaware River.
Elcon?
Yes. You have an update on that?
Yeah. So the Elcon Hazardous Waste Facility, that's a hazardous waste facility that would be located within the 500-year floodplain on the banks of the Delaware River in the Bristol reach of the river. That there's been great community organizing and activism to fend it off, and it has slowed the process down, but we are back, the company is back in at the DEP with a permit and has sort of cleared some of the early hurdles. So essentially, we're battling in the permit phase right now to keep the company from getting their approval so they can never build that facility. But it's called, for anybody who's interested, it's called Elcon, E-L-C-O-N. And we need more people to come to that battle, just like all the battles.
What should we do with toxic waste? Since we don't have anywhere to dump it, it seems like.
So the first thing is we should do everything we can to stop creating it, right? And so that's one of the reasons why we argue against the fracking industry. One thing we should not be doing with waste, which is highly contaminated, It's not necessarily toxic, although it does have radioactive materials. Increasingly now, companies want to take, and municipalities want to take their biosolids and spread them on farm fields. We don't want to be doing that. We don't want to be injecting it into the ground. We do need to find solutions for the toxic waste. The answer to your question is really going to be where it's coming from, what's in it, and then we have to figure out how to handle it. Often it may be some sort of landfill disposal where you have a properly lined facility. But part of the advocacy has to be making the point, we don't have a good solution for any of these toxic waste products. So we need to not be creating them in the first place. But there's no broad-scale answer to the question. It's a great question. There's no broad-scale answer. It's really going to depend on what's the source of the waste, what's in the waste, and then we look at the options from there. But there are some things we know are no's. We know the spreading of biosolids is a no. We know the discharge into rivers and streams is a no, right? Like there are some that are definite. We know building a hazardous waste facility in the 500-year floodplain of the Delaware River, drinking water supply for millions is a no, right? So, but it all depends on the specific facts.
So Maya, you know, you've got a gargantuan effort here just in the Delaware watershed and the states, the 5 states for sliver in Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Delaware. Are you working with any of the other states? That map was kind of discouraging, map of the United States there, Pennsylvania, Montana. Are you working with any leaders in the other states or what's going on nationwide?
Yeah, so I am, as you know, one of the reasons, before I wrote the book, I was trying to spread this message just by going out and speaking, and it became very clear that I needed a bigger platform, right? And as I say to people, I can't sing, and I can't create movies, and I can't create good poetry, but I can write a book. So I wrote the book to try to create that bigger platform to help spread the word. Because of the book, I'm now doing speaking engagements in states across the nation. I'm doing radio shows and other, press in states across the nation, all the while trying to find that champion, right? To inspire them to say, this would be a good idea for our state, and find communities or organizations in different states that want to sort of spearhead the effort. I have folks that have expressed interest in Massachusetts and Colorado and Oregon and other states. They're all in their infancy, but there's definite enthusiasm and interest, and it's just finding the right leaders, and they're sort of getting themselves organized and spearheading it. Spoken with people in Virginia, need a leader in Virginia, so I know he's in the back of the room. But yeah, so we're working at that and really trying to make that happen.
Where's the Virginia people over here?
There's just one Virginia person.
Okay, you gonna have her sign you up?
Well, I didn't plan to be outed like this. I guess, can I go ahead and ask a question? So you're obviously very against fracking, and I totally understand that. How do you suggest that we produce alternate forms of energy that are not so bad for the environment?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. And the beauty of it is that green energy options, clean energy options truly are available. Solar and wind and geothermal and new technologies are being created every day. There is an analysis for Pennsylvania. There's an analysis for New York, there's an analysis for New Jersey, there's an analysis for California. There's actually, in some form or another, there's an analysis for every single state in the nation, for the nation, and for even the world, that demonstrates that we could be totally supported by these kinds of clean energy options by the year 2050 if we turned away from the dirty fossil fuels and those investments and started to transition today in those clean energy options. And in fact, if you want to know how to do that for Pennsylvania, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network put together a very literal roadmap for Pennsylvania legislatures about how you do that through the passage of laws and regulations, investments and incentives and tax breaks. So rather than using the laws and all those incentives to advance fracking and dirty fossil fuels, you instead use it to advance the clean energy options. Stop investing in the fracking and the coal, et cetera. Start investing in the clean energy. And what you will find is not only can you provide all the energy that you need, and again, that's been proven multiple times over, but you actually create more jobs. It's been documented, again, multiple times over that for every $1 million invested in clean energy versus dirty fossil fuels, you create 3 to 5 times the number of jobs. These are also longer-term jobs, they're higher-paying jobs, and they're jobs that are more accessible to people to have the capacity to sort of come in on the ground level and then move up through experience to higher levels of authority and pay. So all the way around, going down the clean energy path is the better way to do it, and you protect the environment at the same time. And I live right outside of Philadelphia. I have solar panels on my roof. I have geothermal in the ground. I have an all-electric car that's out there in the parking lot that's powered by my solar panels. So why was I able to do that? Because there were incentives put in place by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania a few years back that incentivized that. So we need to bring those kinds of strategies back.
Thank you.
Oh, the most important thing, too, I want to tell you is that the other thing that's been demonstrated is there's only about 20 or 30 years of gas actually in the ground. So all of that fracked shale gas is going to be gone in the near term anyway. If we don't start investing in the clean energy path, we're not going to have any energy unless we go to China and Germany for it. So.
We got one over.
Hi, I'm with Heritage Conservancy, and I had a question about the ecological end of it. You mentioned briefly that the Delaware River Atlantic sturgeon is being affected by this. Can you tell me which human activities are causing the most damage?
To the Atlantic sturgeon?
Yeah, and are there any other native species that are being affected?
Pardon?
Are there any other native species being affected?
I mean, yes, there are a lot that are being affected. All of them are being affected different ways. In terms of the Atlantic sturgeon, the Atlantic sturgeon is not being affected by the Green Amendment, but it's being affected by human activities. Early on, the Delaware River used to be the caviar capital of the United States of America. People came, most of the caviar that was pulled in the U.S. came out of Delaware River sturgeon. There was tremendous over-harvesting, so there was already a dramatic decline of the population. And then what started to happen is there started to be dredging of the Delaware River, as well as pollution inputs into the Delaware River. Now, the pollution that's gone into the river has impacted the oxygen levels in the Delaware River. Oxygen levels have risen in recent years, but they're not at high enough levels to solidly support the propagation of the Atlantic sturgeon, for them to be able to reproduce. The other thing is with the dredging and the various deepening projects that have taken place, naturally many reaches of the Delaware estuary were only about 18 feet. During World War II, they started to deepen. At this point, they're now doing a deepening project that takes the main navigation channel down to 45 feet. When you deepen the Delaware River, you end up increasing the amount of salt water that comes up the river, and that because there's more salt water coming up, the fresh water can't keep battling it back, so it comes further up the Delaware estuary. The Atlantic sturgeon need the freshwater portion of the estuary to reproduce, along with those higher oxygen levels. So as you push the salt line up, you shorten the length of the estuary that the sturgeon have to reproduce in, but also as you go further up, the river narrows. So you've also now narrowed the amount of space in the river for fish propagation by the Atlantic sturgeon. You've dramatically declined the places and spaces they have to reproduce, and you've also diminished taken from them the conditions in terms of oxygen and clean water, et cetera, that they need to reproduce. So those are the sturgeon have not been able to restore their populations, and in fact, things are getting worse. Those are a few of the impacts. I can go on for a very long time. I won't, but that just gives you a sense of all the different ways that we're impacting the sturgeon that are not being taken into consideration. You also have cooling water intake structures that are sucking water in from the river. They end up sometimes sucking the sturgeon in. There are a whole boatload of impacts. And the sturgeon is never given really meaningful consideration every time these approvals are approved. It's really quite shocking.
When the young man back here asked about what we could do instead of using natural gas and oil, and made me think, what percentage of this is being exported? So in Pennsylvania, was being fracked out of the ground. How much of that stays in the country, and how much gets exported? Because it's a shame. The pipelines that are now being proposed to go through our area. That's not. I'm under the impression that's not fuel that stays here.
I can't actually tell you what's the exact percentage at this point of what's staying in the U.S. What I can tell you is the number of LNG export facilities that are being proposed is increasing dramatically. We've got several dozen that are being advanced before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in order to take the fracked gas to other countries, and they want to do that because they can sell it for much more money than they can sell it for here in the U.S. And so one of the things that's happening is some of the tempering of the fracking in recent years, a lot of it has been because it's just not profitable. Some of it has been because of lack of access to pipelines. And so that's why one of the reasons why you're seeing this massive proliferation of pipelines. And when we look at, while the pipeline companies love to say, like for the Penn East pipeline, well, we're taking that gas to Pennsylvania and New Jersey communities. When you actually look at the whole spider web of connections, what you can actually see is that the Penn East pipeline connects up with a series of pipelines that could actually take the gas to the Cove Point export facility in Maryland that was recently approved. And we see that time and time again with these pipelines, that when they go into play, the gas is not taken where the company said it was going to be taken, and it's actually being exported. The Mariner East pipeline project, that's a natural gas liquids pipeline. That's to take natural gas liquids to facilities in Philadelphia, many of which are exporting that gas off to other countries for use in the creation of plastics, for example. So,
Thank you. Thank you for doing what you do.
thank you.
I live in Austin Township of Delaware County, right next, and they are building the Mariner East 2 right next to the Chester Creek. I want to ask you, since you've been on town hall meetings, how do you deal with people in my town, and I'll use the polite term, lumpen proletariat? How do you deal with them when they support the bourgeois, when the bourgeois have never done a darn thing for them?
Well, there are so many different personalities that come out to public meetings that treat people in different ways. And I think no matter who it is, I always, when I go to a community meeting, a public meeting to testify, I really just focus on who my audience is. Sometimes my audience is the decision maker at the front of the room. It might be those township officials because I genuinely believe that they are going to listen, or the state agency or the federal agency. Sometimes I know, like in the case of, not Mariner Pipeline, because that's a different kind of pipeline, but a Penn East pipeline, where the decision maker at the front of the room is often the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We know that they don't care what we have to say. So actually the audience, my audience, is who's in the room, because I'm trying to educate them and help them get them organized against the issue. When I've identified who I'm trying to convince of what, I say and do what I have to do to convince that part of the audience, and I just try very hard not to react to the noise and the nonsense. And sometimes people have come up and they hit me, and I've been spit at, and I've had all kinds of things happen. But it doesn't serve my goal to rise up to challenge whatever it is they're doing. It's not a value, because they're not my audience, because they're not going to listen to me anyway. So I sort of try to disregard them and focus on who I'm trying to convince of what.
It's wonderful to have fora like these where people who are already interested and concerned attend. But how do you get to the masses that are being inundated with nonsense and deceptions via CNN and CBS and NBC, all the mass media, and it's mainly the broadcast media? How do you get those people to present the truth and counter the coal industry with clean coal and BP with their wonderful solar nonsense that they're not doing? How do you get out there?
So are you asking me very literally, how do I get CNN to tell the truth, or how do I get other people who are watching CNN to hear the truth?
Both.
Both. Okay. So first off, I mean, one of the things, because I do need to hit a big audience, whether it's the Green Amendment concept or the environment in general, because all these things that you're talking about make me manic. It's very upsetting to watch the news. And one of the reasons why I wrote the book was to try to have a vehicle that would get to more people. And I try to write the book in a way that tells the stories of how people are being impacted by the environment in a way that's interesting, that's not a dry textbook, right? So, and by virtue of having that, I have invested in some media people to try to get to podcasts and radio shows so I can say what I need to say and try to get to different audiences. I always say on every one of my shows, to whoever's out there listening, I will go anywhere to talk to any community on my dime about these issues. So I really offer to make it as easy as possible. So just procedurally, right, those are sort of the procedural things I try to do to get out to bigger and bigger audiences. And MSNBC and CNN and even the more progressive hosts they don't care about the environment. They just care what's happening, right, with Donald Trump and all those things. So we've tried. We still try. Every once in a while, I've gotten on CNN for a specific issue, but, not this kind of concept. All of that being said, the reality is, what I find in my work, people listen and care when they suddenly realize that they're the one that's under threat. People who didn't, pardon my language, people who didn't give a shit about fracking in Bucks County and Hunterdon County, all over here, because we kept it out of the watershed, many people did care and helped us with that success. Many people didn't care. They care now because they're facing the Penny's pipeline. They're facing the Mariner East pipeline. They're facing the compressor station in Kidder Township. Or they're facing the new development project that's going to cut down their forest, or the wetland in their backyard that they enjoyed is now under threat of some new thing. And suddenly people have busy lives. And it's not that they don't care because they genuinely don't care. People are busy. They got stuff to do. They can't be learning all new things all the time. But when they're under threat, suddenly they're willing to listen in an entirely different way. Many of my pipeline battles, the first time they come into the room, actually the first 6 to 8 months, people inevitably get up and their questions or their comments always begin with, well, I know we need fracking, but, well, I understand we have to have fracking. But my message is always to them about why we don't need fracking, how it's not helpful, how it's going to be gone, how we have these other options. And inevitably, those people who were staunch believers in the need to frack, 6 or 8 months down the line, begin with, we don't need this pipeline because we don't need this fracked gas. They're willing to listen because they're under threat. So that's really a lot, too. When I take every advocacy opportunity to talk about the specific issue, but also help the communities understand the bigger context. I don't just help people understand that they don't want the forest cut because they don't want that development project, but understand why the forest is valuable, how development can be done in a way that's not so harmful, stormwater issue. I mean, you just broaden the array because now you have people who want to learn and they're eager to learn. So I just think it's human nature. That's how I best reach people, is when they're under threat. And that's just part of my reality. So sometimes I just say, I'm not going to bother to try to convince them because they're not ready to listen because they're not under threat.
I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. And I just wanted to, I just was wondering if you noticed that how we're saving electricity here at Delaware Valley University here in the Life Sciences Auditorium, mainly because neither Reg nor I know how to operate the lights. So it's getting dark, and Maya's had a long day. She was in Delaware all day today. She's still, it's kind of
it's
soothing.
great.
I kind of like it like this. But
I feel like I've got a spotlight
let's
on.
take one more question, and then we'll thank Maya for her participation. Go ahead.
Okay, Maya, who are our local legislators who are backing this and who are not?
So backing the Green Amendment, I mean, I truthfully couldn't go down the list, right? I mean, I actually can't answer that question, who's for it, who's against it. It happens in every single conversation. And because there are elections going on, I kind of need to stay away from that as a 501c3. I mean, that's part of, there are people who are running for office that I have opinions about, but they're running for office, so I can't say anything.
I would suggest that all of us take it upon ourselves to buy a copy of the book and hand it to our legislators.
And ask them.
Excellent.
I mean, that's one of the things I ask in election season. Call up your legislator and ask them, or come to the debate that's supposed to happen between Wallace and Fitzpatrick that Dennis was just talking about, and ask Scott Wallace and ask, what's Brian now, Fitzpatrick? Ask them, what do you think about the Green Amendment? I guarantee you one of them can answer the question. I don't know about the other one. So,
Maya, thank you so much for what you do and for being here tonight. Let's hear it for
thank
Maya.
you.
I'd like to thank our community members, too, who have come here tonight. I really appreciate you probably had some difficulty finding the building and the room. Now you know where it is. If you're interested in future talks related to the One Health seminars, the clipboard up in the front, if you give me your email, I will keep in touch with you. Anytime you can send me an email and say, please, please, no more. But in the future, we have lots of speakers lined up. We usually have 5 seminars per semester. We'd love to see you back at Del Val. So thank you very much.